Welcome to the brownstone, where logic triumphs and tempers occasionally flare. Tell us where in the world you're listening. Wolfe may never leave home, but his stories travel well. Subscribe for more mysteries with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the Three Labradors. If you've ever tried convincing Nero Wolfe to lift his eyes from a book after 10 o'clock, you'd better bring a brass band or a fire. The call that came in at exactly 11 minutes past midnight didn't have either, just the thin tremor of a woman's voice and a problem wrapped in money. I was half asleep at my desk, filing reports and pretending the night was over. When the phone rang, I figured it was a wrong number, or Kramer working insomnia through harassment. But the tone on the other end wasn't police. It was Park Avenue panic trying to keep its pearls from rattling. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Mrs. Clarice Dane. I'm terribly sorry to call so late, but I was told you and Mr. Wolfe handle difficult situations." Her vowels were crisp, the kind they teach you with a trust fund. I asked, "Difficult how? We've got a scale from missing cats to murder." "My husband is missing. He left for the Kennel Club dinner at 7 and never came home. His hat, coat and keys are still here. And," she hesitated, "he left the dogs." That last part caught my ear. Plural. 3 Labradors. They're still leashed by the front door. They never let him out of sight. I don't know what to do. I scribbled her address and told her I'd pass it to Wolfe, though I didn't promise action before sunrise. She hung up with a gasp like a candle going out. I sat there a minute, staring at the receiver, weighing the odds that she was hysterical, drunk, or rich enough to be interesting. Wolfe's reading light still glowed through the crack of the office door, so I went in. The room smelled of tobacco and discipline. He was in the red leather chair, Gibbon open on his lap, lips pursed around a cigar stub that had gone cold. "Midnight interruptions," he said without looking up, "are seldom intelligent." "This one came with pedigree," I said. "Mrs. Clarice Dane, Gramercy Park, 3 dogs, 1 missing husband." That got him to blink. "Dogs," he repeated, as if tasting something sour. "Archie, I have stated repeatedly, canines are insufferably democratic. They slobber indiscriminately and possess no decorum." She didn't ask for your endorsement, just help. Her husband disappeared without his hat, coat, or keys. Even you might call that irregular. He closed Gibbon carefully. If the man has absconded, that is the police's function. If he has merely sought refuge from matrimony, it is his right. "Maybe," I said, "but his wife's willing to pay for confirmation. She sounded desperate enough to pay retail." That word, pay, is Wolfe's Pavlovian bell. He lifted an eyebrow. "What does she possess beyond canines?" "Apparently a kennel business called Dane's Pride. Makes her the queen of the pure breed set. You'd like it. Paperwork, hierarchy, genetic snobbery." He exhaled slowly. "Phooey. Yet the fortune of such enterprises can be considerable." I nodded toward the phone. "Shall I arrange a morning consultation?" Wolfe scowled at the clock. 9 o'clock is intolerable. My orchids require attention until 11. "Then she can admire the orchids while you brood. They're almost as temperamental as she sounds." He gave me the kind of look that could wilt the orchids themselves. "Archie, if she insists on bringing the beasts, you will take them directly to the basement. I shall not negotiate in the presence of panting." "Noted," I said, though from experience clients tend to do that anyway. He tugged the bell cord. "Fritz," he called when the Swiss Meister appeared, "Mr. Goodwin will require sustenance if he intends to prolong this invasion of my repose." Fritz looked pleased to have an excuse to rescue me with coffee and a sandwich. While he vanished, Wolfe muttered about civilization's decline and the canine menace to carpets. I used the time to type a brief note for the case file, labeling it "The 3 Labradors." It had a ring to it, like trouble wagging its tail. Wolfe finally said, "Describe the woman's voice." "Controlled hysteria, the kind that's been to finishing school." "Age?" "Judging by tone, mid-30s, moneyed, maybe frightened enough to tell the truth." He grunted. "And you intend to meet her yourself?" "Unless you plan to leave the brownstone, which would shock the pigeons." His eyes narrowed. Sarcasm, Archie, is a blunt instrument. Use it sparingly. Blame the hour, I said. It dulls the edge. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Very well. Inform her that I will see her at noon, not before. You will attend to any preliminary verification of her story, discreetly. And Archie? Yeah? Do not allow the animals upstairs. I saluted. If I ever disappear, I hope I leave behind something more dignified than 3 confused Labradors. He permitted himself the ghost of a smile. One can only hope. Fritz reappeared with coffee strong enough to sterilize evidence. While I drank, Wolfe dictated a short letter for me to deliver to Saul Panzer in the morning, an instruction to shadow anyone connected to Dane's Pride Kennels. He spoke the words slowly, savouring each clause like a fine wine. When I'd finished typing, I asked, "What's your preliminary theory, boss? Man runs off, wife panics, dogs file for custody." Wolfe scowled. Speculation before fact is vulgar. However, a man who leaves his keys and his dogs intends to return, or was prevented. That's comforting. Comfort, he said, is irrelevant. We shall see if Mrs. Dane's distress is genuine or performed. I cleaned my typewriter, knowing better than to press further. Wolfe had slipped into what I call his ruminating bear phase. Still, heavy, and about as approachable as an iceberg. At 12:30, I made the mistake of glancing at the phone again. Wolfe noticed. "You are restless." "Just efficient," I said. "If the guy's lying in a ditch, the trail cools every minute." He closed his eyes. "Archie, mankind has existed for millennia. It will survive the night." "Sure, but will my commission?" That earned me silence thick enough to butter. I took the hint and headed for bed. Before turning in, I checked the front door, the locks, and the thermometer. Routine, but you never know when a midnight call will invite company. By 9 the next morning, the city had scrubbed its conscience in sunlight. I was in the office with coffee and clean cuffs when Fritz's polite knock announced breakfast. Wolfe arrived 10 minutes later, looking like he'd been carved from annoyance and butter. "At what hour," he asked, "does this Mrs. Dane propose to darken my door?" She said she'd come as soon as the dogs could travel. They're Labradors, not diplomats. He said, "I'll remain in the plant rooms until 11. Bring her at noon." "You could try liking dogs," I said. "It might broaden your humanity." "Archie," he said with icy calm, "when man ceases to command beasts, civilization collapses. Dogs are conspirators in that downfall." I grinned. "You say the same about telephones, automobiles, and women." "Each," he replied, "has its perils." At precisely 12 o'clock the bell rang, followed by a chorus of barks that made Fritz flinch in the hall. Through the glass panel I saw Mrs. Clarice Dane, tall, trim, dressed in dove-grey with pearls and gloves, holding 3 leashes like trophies. The dogs were magnificent, sleek black coats, eyes alert, and manners that made me look like the rough element. She apologized for the intrusion, voice trembling under its polish. I took her wrap and, per orders, steered the canines down to the basement laundry, giving them water and what dignity the setting allowed. When I came back, Wolfe had emerged from upstairs, impeccably arranged behind his desk, expression set to regal distaste. Mrs. Dane perched on the red leather chair like it might bite. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you for seeing me. I hardly know where to begin." "Begin?" he said. "With fact." She laid it out. The Kennel Club dinner at 7. Her husband Henry left for it and never returned. His coat and keys hung untouched in the vestibule. Only the leashes told another story, one frayed at the clasp, one wet, as if dipped in river mud. As she spoke, I noted her hands. Steady now, though the right glove was darker at the fingertips, faintly smudged. Perfume couldn't hide the faint canine musk, part kennel, part fear. When she finished, Wolfe asked Ed, "Why call me rather than the police?" "I will if I must, but I thought perhaps a private approach would spare publicity. My husband is well known in business circles, and I was told you have methods." "Indeed," he said. "They are expensive." She reached into her bag and produced a cheque already signed but blank in amount. "Whatever you deem fair." Wolfe's eyebrows rose 0.5 millimeter, which in his language was applause. "I am moved," he said, "to curiosity." He instructed me to collect all details, addresses, recent correspondence, the make of her husband's shoes. She hesitated, as though uncertain which of those might incriminate her. While she complied, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, absorbing every tremor of her voice. Finally he said, "Mrs. Dane, you may leave your address and telephone number. Mr. Goodwin will make certain inquiries and report by evening. Until then, refrain from calling the police." She nodded, relief flooding her face. As I escorted her out, she asked softly, "You do think he's alive, don't you?" I said, "If he isn't, he picked the wrong night to go missing. Wolfe hates to be wrong before breakfast." When the door shut and silence returned, Wolfe muttered, "3 Labradors, a missing man, and a woman who smells of guilt and dog shampoo. An unpromising combination." "Maybe," I said, "but the retainer's promising enough." He frowned, reached for Gibbon, and dismissed me with a flick of fingers. "You may proceed, Archie, but do not expect the scent to be pleasant." I picked up my hat. "Pleasant's overrated. Profit's better." As I stepped out into the morning, I heard him behind me, murmuring, "Phooey." It was as close as Wolfe ever got to a benediction. After I'd seen her out, Wolfe dabbed his mouth with a napkin, eyes still on the doorway like it had taught him something poisonous. "We proceed," he said, "on the assumption that her distress is curated." It was a remark that could have meant anything, or everything. I logged it mentally under red herring, possible breeder variety. Outside, a couple of clubmen were already taking bets with the papers. I promised no one anything, except trouble. Outside, the afternoon smelled of city exhaust and ambition, both purebred and mongrel. I lit a cigarette and started back toward the brownstone, wondering if anyone in that club ever looked in a mirror and saw more than their own pedigree. At 6:30 the next morning, the phone's ring cut through the brownstone like a buzzsaw through butter. Wolfe, who considered mornings a government conspiracy, let it ring twice before flicking a glance at me over his newspaper. I took the hint and picked up. "Goodwin," came Kramer's voice, rough and unshaven. "We found your missing husband, East River Docks. Bring your shoes." "Walking or wading?" I asked. "Neither. He's already been fished out." Wolfe lowered his paper an inch. "Inspector Kramer, if you have located the man, I congratulate you. Spare me the aquatic details." "Yeah, you'll be spared," Kramer said. "But your boy isn't. I want Goodwin down here. He saw the wife. He can make the ID. East 12th and the river. And tell Wolfe not to stall me with Latin." Wolfe's sigh was pure martyrdom. Phooey. Water. By the time I reached the East River, dawn was the colour of old tin and smelled about as pleasant. 2 harbour cops stood watch over a stretcher covered with oilcloth. The dock sweated mist and diesel fumes, and gulls screamed overhead like a jury that had already made up its mind. Kramer stood beside the body, chewing on an unlit cigar. His hat brim was pulled low, his coat collar higher. "Morning," he grunted, "if you can call it that." "I'd call it early," I said. "Let's see him." He lifted the corner of the cloth. Henry Dane looked better suited to a stock certificate than a slab. The river had roughed him up, face swollen, lips split, but death had been efficient. His wallet lay open on a nearby table, dry despite the rest of him. That, in police arithmetic, equals suspicion. Kramer said, "Wallet ID matches the wife's description. Henry Dane, 38, you confirm?" "Confirmed," I said, "though I'd like to know who did his last-minute laundry. That's not river damage," Kramer grunted. "Bruises, rope burns on the wrists. Coroner says they're pre-mortem. Someone tied him up, worked him over, then dumped him." I squatted beside the stretcher, keeping my shoes out of the puddles. On Dane's sleeve was something that didn't belong. Short, coarse strands of black hair. Not human, not synthetic. I plucked one delicately with a pencil and held it under the light. "Dog hair," I said. "Large breed. Labrador, maybe." Kramer raised an eyebrow. "You think one of his wife's mutts dragged him to the river?" "Not unless it grew thumbs, but it might tell us who got close to him last." He grunted again, the Kramerian equivalent of applause. "We'll run it through the lab. And before you ask, no, we didn't find his coat, hat, or shoes. Just him, wrapped neat in a piece of dock rope." I straightened. "You'd think whoever did it would have weighted him down. Either they panicked or wanted him found." "That's my read," Kramer said. "You tell Wolfe to keep his orchids out of this. This is police business now." "Sure," I said. "I'll deliver the message right after lunch when his hearing returns." He snorted. You're a wise guy, Goodwin. Just remember, if Wolfe starts meddling, I'll have to make it official. Inspector, I said. Wolfe's too civilized to meddle. He delegates that to me. That got a grunt with a smirk attached. He turned away to bark orders at the uniforms. By 8:30 I was back at West 35th Street, reporting to the Mountain in residence. Wolfe sat behind his desk in a fresh yellow shirt, a single orchid at his buttonhole like a medal. Fritz had delivered coffee, and civilization was once again in session. The identification is certain? Wolfe asked. Positive. Henry Dane, deceased. No doubt about it. He took a beating before someone gave him a permanent bath. Rope burns. Both wrists, and a few friendly reminders across the ribs. He closed his eyes briefly. Bestial. Always the brute instinct. Speaking of beasts, I said, there were dog hairs on his sleeve, black, short, thick Labrador grade. That got him to open one eye. Interesting. The dogs, then, are either witnesses or accomplices. Or shedding, I said. He ignored that. Inspector Kramer's demeanour? Standard issue, gruff, suspicious, and half a cigar short of patience. He asked me to remind you to keep your orchids out of it. Phooey. If Mr. Kramer prefers ignorance, I shall not deprive him of it. You'll still work the case. He drummed his fingers on the desk blotter. A client's retainer supersedes an inspector's irritation. And you, Archie, did you provoke him? Only to his usual boiling point. That's our rhythm. At that moment, the phone rang again. Wolfe gestured, so I answered. It was Kramer. Tell Wolfe, he said, the coroner found fibres from the same dog hair under Dane's fingernails. Whatever this mess is, it's tied to those animals you mentioned. And for the record, Goodwin, if you're holding anything back. Inspector, Wolfe's voice cut in smoothly from across the desk. Mr. Goodwin's presence does not constitute interference, merely observation refined by wit. You may proceed with your investigation. There was a pause. Then Kramer said, almost politely, Yeah, well, tell your wit to stay in line. He hung up. Wolfe met my eye. Archie, you will visit Mrs. Dane presently. Do not inform her of her husband's demise until I authorize it. The truth is a tool. It must be applied judiciously. Understood, I said, but she's going to find out soon enough. Perhaps, but not from the police. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz will serve breakfast. Afterward I shall retire to the plant rooms. Death, Archie, even when predictable, remains a vulgarity best offset by orchids. Sure, I said. I'll take bacon over botany. He scowled faintly. Your palate remains undeveloped. I poured myself coffee. Maybe, but at least it's alive. He sniffed, rose ponderously, and vanished toward the elevator. I watched him go, thinking about a corpse on a dock and 3 dogs that might know more about murder than their mistress. By 10 that morning, the city was barking louder than the dogs in Mrs. Dane's kennel. Every paper from the Gazette to the Daily Blade had splashed Henry Dane across the front page like a prize poodle who'd won posthumously. The headlines were poetry in caps, Kennel King killed, Dog Tycoon drowned, and my personal favourite from the Sun, Wife waits, dogs weep. It was enough to make you think Manhattan had traded newsprint for dog biscuits. Still filing clippings for Wolfe's records, I reached for the phone when it rang. The voice was as familiar as yesterday's coffee. Goodwin, Lon Cohen said. Don't give me the dumb act. I know you've got something. Lon, I always have something. Unfortunately, most of it's indigestion. He chuckled, which meant the hook was already in. Kramer's tight-lipped. The Gazette's running with the Kennel Club angle. Purebred scandal, high society, the works. Who's the widow's lawyer? Any hint of a will? If I knew, I'd auction it off, I said. And before you ask, Wolfe isn't talking. That's why I'm calling you. I'll keep your name out of it. Yeah, I said. Like last time you kept me out of the column next to Society Sleuth Snare's heiress. Archie, don't be sore. Just one quote, off the record. If newsmen had tails, Lon, you'd wag yours for a quote. He laughed again, which meant I hadn't entirely wasted my charm. But when he mentioned a photograph running in the noon edition, a grainy shot from the Kennel Club dinner showing a man in shadow near Dane's chair, I stopped breathing long enough to ask for details. Looks like somebody spiking a drink, Lon said. Could be nothing. Could be murder on candid camera. Get me a copy, I said. And don't run my name unless you want Wolfe to come after you with a dictionary. When I hung up, Wolfe was already watching me from his chair, the morning sunlight filtering through the office blinds across his bulk like stripes on a wary tiger. He'd been silent long enough to make me uneasy. "Mr. Goodwin," he said finally, "was that our friend Mr. Cohen baying for carrion?" Louder than usual. They're running a photo, someone playing bartender at the Kennel Club dinner. "Ah," Wolfe pursed his lips. "The press, like hounds, pursue scent rather than substance. They yelp whether they near the quarry or not." I handed him the Gazette I'd already opened. "They've got your name halfway to the headline. Private sleuth retained by widow." He glanced at it once and dismissed it with a puff of air. "Phooey! The Gazette is a kennel of its own breed, half mongrel, half mastiff, and wholly indiscriminate." The bell cord trembled slightly under his fingers. That was as close as Wolfe ever came to fidgeting. "You will, however, restrain Mr. Cohen's enthusiasm. Prattle judiciously, or I shall revoke your beer privileges." "That's extortion." "That," Wolfe said mildly, "is discipline." Before I could retaliate, the doorbell sounded with the persistence of a tax collector. Fritz appeared, announcing, "Inspector Kramer, sir." Wolfe groaned. One beast departs, another arrives. Kramer entered, looking as if he'd been wrestling deadlines and losing. His cigar was unlit but chewed to pulp, and his hat stayed on until Wolfe's expression pried it off. "Morning," he said. "Or what's left of it." Wolfe inclined his head. "Inspector, I commend your punctuality, if not your purpose." "Don't start," Kramer snapped. "I'm up to my neck in reporters. Somebody leaked the Kennel Club angle, and now the DA's office wants answers before the noon edition. I figured maybe you'd cooperate for once." "Cooperate," Wolfe repeated. "A noble word abused by bureaucracy." Kramer grunted and tossed the folded Gazette onto Wolfe's desk. "You're quoted as being retained by the widow. If you're in this, I need to know what you know." Wolfe lifted the paper delicately, as if it might shed fleas. "Inspector, I have offered no comment to the press. That fabrication is their own. My client's affairs are confidential." "Don't get high-handed," Kramer warned. "You've been seen with Panzer sniffing around the Kennel Club. If you're holding evidence—" "Inspector," Wolfe interrupted smoothly, "if I were holding evidence, it would be because you lack the wit to obtain it. Fortunately for your office, I am at present withholding only my patience." Kramer's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I'm not here to spar. The coroner's report comes in this afternoon. You might want to hear it before you get too smug." I said, "That'll be a first. Wolfe's smug on an empty stomach." Kramer gave me a look that could have seasoned steel. "Goodwin, if I thought you were leaking to the papers, I'd haul you in myself." "You'd have to catch me first," I said, "and that would ruin both our reputations." "Enough!" Wolfe barked, sharp as a gavel. "Inspector, my employee's irreverence is congenital. If you wish to proceed, confine yourself to facts." Kramer fished a folded photo from his pocket and laid it flat on the desk. "Here's a fact. That's Dane at the Kennel Club dinner, and that's somebody in the background near his glass. We're running enlargements. Recognize him?" Wolfe leaned forward just enough to prove he wasn't carved from granite. "The image is too indistinct. It could be any man or woman. You will, of course, waste valuable hours identifying the wrong one." Kramer pocketed the photo with a sigh. "You know, Wolfe, for a guy who never leaves his chair, you sure step on a lot of toes." "Anatomical accidents," Wolfe said. "Yours are particularly susceptible." For a second, Kramer's scowl almost turned into a smile. "All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. But if I find you've been using the press to play both ends—" "You will bark," Wolfe said, "and I will listen politely." Kramer's answer was a low growl, but he left without slamming the door. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Wolfe reached for the phone directory and murmured, "Archie, make a note. The Kennel Club's photographer must be found and interviewed, quietly, preferably before the Gazette fabricates a scandal." I nodded, tucking the clippings into the case file. "You know, boss, between Cohen and Kramer, we're surrounded by bloodhounds." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Hounds are noble. These are journalists." Fritz appeared at the doorway again. "Lunch is served, sir." Wolfe rose, smoothing his vest. "Ah, at last, something palatable." As he moved toward the dining room, I gathered the papers and muttered, "If he ever opens a kennel, I'm naming it the press room." Wolfe's voice drifted back, dry and precise. "And you, Archie, shall be its most talkative exhibit." By 4 that afternoon, the brownstone was simmering in the kind of late-day light that makes shadows look like they're eavesdropping. Wolfe was at his desk, finishing his post-orchid beer, which meant the rest of humanity was allowed to exist again. Fritz had brought in tea service, a diplomatic peace offering to the next soul doomed to enter. That soul arrived precisely at 4:20, heels clicking like a metronome for ambition. Victoria Ames didn't wait to be invited past the threshold. She floated in as though the house had been expecting her since birth. Tall, silver blonde, and so perfectly arranged she made a diamond look self-conscious. She wore a grey suit that probably cost more than my annual wardrobe. She glanced around the office, registering the books, the globe, and Wolfe's bulk behind the desk, with one swift appraisal. The woman had the eyes of someone used to judging breeds and men. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, in a tone that suggested he should already be grateful for her existence, "I'm told you're looking into the unfortunate affair of Henry Dane." Wolfe inclined his head. "Madam, I do not look into affairs. I consider them." That made her blink once. She recovered quickly. "Consider, then, that I had nothing to do with his death, though I can't say I mourn him. He was a thief in a tuxedo." I settled onto the red leather chair beside the globe, notebook in hand. "You mean dog thief, not diamond thief, I take it?" She gave me a glance over one immaculate shoulder. "If you must reduce tragedy to wordplay, yes, Henry Dane stole from me bloodlines, breeding papers, even my kennel's good name. He forged documents to pass mixed-breed animals as champions. I confronted him, of course. That sort of fraud infects an entire registry." Wolfe reached for a Petit Four, examined it, and returned it to the tray without tasting it. "You accuse the deceased of felony forgery and commercial deceit. I presume you can substantiate." "I can." Her gloved fingers extracted a folded paper from her handbag. "This is a registration slip for my Silver Streamline champion retrievers, noted for their coat luster. Compare the signature to Dane's records and you'll find an imitation." Wolfe accepted the document delicately. "Forgery is an art requiring motive. Was your confrontation public?" "Private," she said quickly, too quickly. "At the Kennel Club dinner. We spoke briefly before the presentation. I told him he'd pay for sullying my breeding line." He laughed. "That was 3 nights before his death." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Did he threaten you?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Hardly. He didn't believe I'd expose him. Men like that never think a woman has claws." I said, "You brought yours polished." She smiled wider. "I'm sure you'd prefer teeth, Mr. Goodwin." Wolfe cleared his throat with a noise that sounded like judgment in Latin. "Archie, your interjections, while spirited, impede inquiry." "Sorry," I said, force of charm. He ignored me and turned back to her. "Mrs. Ames, Miss Ames, you admit animosity toward Mr. Dane. That alone makes your visit suspect." She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk's edge, an act that would have had lesser men confessing to arson. "I came to clear my name, not invite your suspicion. Mrs. Dane will no doubt throw it at me soon enough. She hates me almost as much as I pity her." Wolfe's tone turned glacial. "Pity is an unpleasant form of vanity." Archie Goodwin, diplomatic as ever, chimed in. "If you pity her too loudly, Miss Ames, you'll get quoted in the Gazette. They love Lady Jules." She ignored that and instead glanced toward the tray. "Do you mind if I—" Wolfe gestured curtly. She poured herself tea, movements neat as a surgeon's, and adjusted her gloves afterward. That's when I noticed the faint reddish smudge at the inner wrist of her right glove, like ink or something she'd brushed against. I made a note of it, but said nothing. "Mr. Wolfe," she resumed, "I'm not heartless. But the Kennel Club is my world. It's built on trust. Henry Dane corrupted that. Someone had to make him stop." "Someone did," I said, "a bit more permanently than you intended." She shot me a cool glare. "Are you implying—" Wolfe raised a hand. "Miss Ames, please. Mr. Goodwin's metaphors are as indelicate as his sense of humour." "Metaphors," she echoed, dry as gin. I wasn't aware I'd become one. Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Everything becomes metaphor eventually, madam, including murder." The silence after that had the density of pudding. She tried to meet his gaze, but found it like staring into a mirror that saw too much. Then she smiled again, brittle this time. "You're suggesting I had reason and opportunity. You're wrong." "Then help me be right," Wolfe said. "Who else despised him?" She considered. "Dr. Hale, perhaps. Dane accused him of favoritism in show judging. or that reporter from the Kennel Journal. But if you're implying I poisoned him—" "No one implied," Wolfe murmured. "You introduced the notion yourself." She stood abruptly. "I came here to assist, not to be insulted." "Then assist," Wolfe replied. "Answer one final question. Did you observe anything unusual about Dane's dogs?" "Only that they looked miserable. Mixed stock often does." Wolfe's lips curved slightly. "Mixed stock, yes. Yet one dog bore a tattoo marking inconsistent with registry standards. Queen's Domino 2, was it not? You've examined many such markings, Miss Ames. Tell me, what does a C-092 signify?" Her pupils flickered before she caught herself. "Nothing. A clerical error, perhaps." "Perhaps," Wolfe said softly. "Or perhaps an unregistered litter, hidden for profit." She gathered her bag. "I see this conversation's over." "Not quite," I said, leaning against the desk. "About that tattoo, you flinched like someone stepped on your leash." Her smile returned, this time feline. "You're observant, Mr. Goodwin. Be careful, that can be dangerous." "Comes with the collar," I said. "Enough," Wolfe ordered, the word cutting the air. "Miss Ames, I thank you for your candour. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. If not, she interrupted, "I'll hear about it from the police, not from a man hiding behind orchids." She turned and left, perfume trailing behind her like a closing argument. I shut the door and came back to find Wolfe staring into the middle distance, brows knitting into architecture. "So?" I asked. "Do we believe her?" "She is lying," he said. "Not about everything, only the part that matters." "Which part is that?" "The dog," Wolfe said. "Her reaction to the tattoo code was spontaneous and unguarded. She recognized it, and your notice of her gesture was commendable." "Thanks," I said. "You mean the twitch or the smile?" "Both," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "But your zoological metaphors are excessive. Leashes, collars, you are not writing copy for a pet store." "I'll restrain myself," I said, "if you promise not to use madam like a death sentence." That earned the faintest rumble that might have been amusement. "Archie, record this interview verbatim. Then telephone Mr. Panzer. I require him to examine Mrs. Dane's kennels again, specifically the markings on Queen's Domino 2. I went to the typewriter, rolling in a fresh sheet. The rhythmic click of keys filled the office while Wolfe dictated from memory, word perfect as always. When we finished, I stacked the pages neatly. "You think Ames planted a fake tattoo?" "Possibly. Or removed one. In any case, she knows more than she admitted. And if she's telling the truth about Dane stealing her bloodlines, then someone else profited from his deceit," Wolfe said. "And profit, Mr. Goodwin, is the most reliable motive in the animal kingdom, human or otherwise." Fritz appeared at the doorway, his timing as precise as the bells of St. Patrick's. "Dinner will be served at 8, sir." "Thank you, Fritz," Wolfe said. "Until then, solitude." He rose ponderously and moved toward the elevator. As the doors closed on his retreat, I looked at the empty chair where Victoria Ames had sat, her perfume still faint on the air, and muttered, "She smiled like a cat with a pedigree chart, and I've got the scratches to prove it." By the time I reached Mrs. Dane's townhouse, the sky had gone the colour of a bad nickel, and the rain was coming down in steady threads, tapping the window panes like someone drumming for admission. Fritz's umbrella had already died an honourable death on the sidewalk, so I arrived damp enough to make the butler hesitate before deciding I was safe for the furniture. He ushered me into the study, a high-ceilinged room full of portraits of dogs and people who looked about as intelligent. Mrs. Dane was at the desk, dressed in mourning black that managed to look like a deliberate fashion statement. Her eyes had the glassy brightness of someone whose grief had been thoroughly pressed and folded for display. The Labradors were sprawled near the hearth, 3 of them, sleek, black and bored. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, rising, "you wish to see them again?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Wolfe wants me to confirm a few details about their behaviour. Dogs have funny memories. Sometimes they remember what people forget." She looked uncertain. "They've been restless since Henry, since the police came." "Understandable. They probably liked him better alive." That earned me a glare, but she gestured to the dogs. "Be gentle with Domino. She's the most temperamental." I squatted near them, letting them get a sniff of my coat first. Duke and Duchess came forward with polite curiosity. Domino hung back, ears half lowered, eyes sharp. There's a difference between suspicion and recognition, and she had the latter. I reached into my briefcase and drew out the coat Kramer had released to us that morning, Henry Dane's, neatly tagged and sealed. The moment the scent reached Domino, he went from still to fury. His hackles rose, a low growl vibrating through the room like a bass note. In 2 seconds flat, she lunged, jaws snapping inches from the coat. Duke barked, Duchess whined, and Mrs. Dane screamed. I held firm. Easy, girl. Down. Domino didn't go down. She backed away, pacing, whining now the way a dog does when it's trying to remember something ugly. Mrs. Dane clutched the edge of the desk. What on earth does that mean? She gasped. That your husband wore something this dog didn't like, I said, folding the coat again. Could be another person's scent. Could be a chemical. Could be guilt. Hard to tell which. She drew herself up. You are implying? Nothing yet. I just collect reactions. Wolfe does the implying later. I gave Domino a minute to calm down, then turned to the leash rack beside the door, a handsome mahogany frame with brass hooks labelled for each dog. The leashes were well-oiled leather, polished like shoe straps. One of the hooks, however, had a faint scuff mark on the wall behind it. It looked wrong, too deliberate. I leaned closer and saw the thin line of a hinge. Mrs. Dane said sharply, "What are you doing?" "Admiring craftsmanship," I said. "Your late husband had a fine eye for details." With a nudge, the panel swung open on a narrow compartment. Inside was a neat bundle of envelopes, each tied with twine, and something that made my pulse quicken, a small stack of pedigree certificates, the kind registered breeders guard like treasure. The problem was, half the names were forged. I'd seen enough paperwork in this case to recognize Dane's signature, and this wasn't it. Mrs. Dane went pale. "Where did you—" I held one up. "Hidden compartments are like bad secrets, Mrs. Dane. They start to smell if you leave them long enough." She made a move toward the papers, but I slid them into my briefcase first. "Sorry, but these will need a trip to the brownstone for examination. Routine." "I had no idea those were there," she said quickly. "Henry must have—" "Let's leave Henry out of it for now. He's done enough." Before she could answer, the phone rang on the desk. She hesitated, then picked it up. I could hear the voice faintly from where I stood. It was Saul Pantzer, and I didn't need clairvoyance to know he wasn't calling to chat about the weather. Her tone stiffened. Yes, the chauffeur, I understand." She hung up, visibly shaken. "Bad news?" I asked. "That was one of my staff. He said my driver hasn't returned from errands. I don't know why that should matter." "It might, depending on where he's been," I said. "If it eases your mind, I'll check in with our man following him." I left her standing by the desk, the dogs gathered close as if guarding her from what she didn't dare think. Outside, the rain had turned into a sheet of steady grey, and the street lamps were already glowing like bruised halos. I ducked into a payphone 2 blocks down and called the brownstone. Wolfe answered, which meant Orchid Hour was officially suspended, a sign of either progress or apocalypse. "Well?" he demanded. "I've just been kissed by luck and bitten by a Labrador," I said. Domino went berserk when I showed him Dane's coat. Growled, lunged, the works. Either that dog smells a murderer or has a personal grudge against Taylor's wool. There was a pause, then Wolfe's sigh rolled through the receiver. "Archie, you are a dramatist. Did you find anything more tangible?" I did. Hidden compartment in the leash rack, full of forged pedigree certificates. I'm bringing them in. And Saul just reported the widow's chauffeur met with a man from the Kennel Club records office. I'd wager cash that the paperwork's linked. "Ah," Wolfe's tone shifted, soft and deliberate. "The scent of deceit, masked with perfume. Well done." "Thank the dog," I said. "She's the one with instincts." "With instincts." "If the dog continues to assist you," Wolfe said dryly, "I shall consider hiring her as your replacement." "Sure," I said. "He works cheaper, but his typing's lousy." A brief, dangerous silence followed. Then Wolfe said, "Return immediately. The forgery is a key. I must see its teeth." "Right away," I said. "You want the coat too?" "Of course. And Archie, take care. I dislike being forced to retrieve your body from municipal storage." "That's mutual," I said, and hung up. As I walked toward the corner to catch a cab, I spotted Saul's flat cap under the awning of a tobacconist's. He motioned me over. The rain made rivers down his coat sleeves, but his grin was dry. "Got him," he said. "The chauffeur met a records clerk named Jenkins. Cash changed hands. Small bills, no hesitation. I tailed Jenkins back to the kennel club, but he doubled back toward a side alley. When I looked again, he was gone. Gone? Like he had a leash around his conscience, Saul said. You want me to keep on him? Stick close to the chauffeur, I said. He's wagging somebody's tail, and I want to know whose. Saul nodded and melted back into the mist, as invisible as ever. I hailed a cab and climbed in, clutching the briefcase on my lap. The forged certificates inside rustled faintly with the motion of the car, like dogs whining to be let out. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe would already be arranging his thoughts like pieces on a chessboard, preparing to make his next move. For now, I just sat back, watching the rain blur Manhattan into streaks of grey and gold, thinking that in this business, instincts were fine, but only if you knew whose they were. It was around 9 that night, and the sky outside looked like someone had spilled a bucket of ink over Manhattan and then shaken the whole city to see what floated. Wolfe had just finished dinner, duck à l'orange Fritz is doing, and was halfway through his post-prandial beer ritual. I was considering a second cup of coffee when the phone rang, sharp enough to slice through the civilized quiet. I got it on the third ring. Nero Wolfe's residence, I said, with the usual amount of cheer that implies there's no vacancy for trouble. The voice on the other end didn't care about tone. It was Lon Cohen, and his words came fast enough to need a leash. Archie, drop whatever you're doing. The kennel club's in full hysteria. Dr. Leonard Hale's been found dead, cyanide poisoning, in his car outside the Midtown Medical Building. The cops are saying murder. I straightened. You're sure it's not just bad coffee? It was coffee. Thermos found beside him, labelled with his initials, but the fingerprints belonged to Henry Dane. That made me whistle low. 2 dead dogmen in a week. Somebody's working through the directory. Lon's voice turned grim. The city editor wants comment. Is Wolfe working the case for the widow or the dogs? Neither, I said. He's working for truth, which pays worse. I hung up before he could wag any further. Wolfe hadn't moved, but I could feel his gaze. Another one? He asked. Dr. Leonard Hale, I said. Cyanide coffee, dead in his car. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly. Phooey. Poison is a coward's instrument. Maybe, but this coward knows his chemistry. The fingerprints on the thermos belong to Dane. That got him. His head tilted, the heavy brow drawing together. Dane is deceased. His fingerprints, therefore, have been transplanted by artifice or deceit. Either implies calculation of an impressive order. Before I could reply, the doorbell sounded, long and insistent. Wolfe groaned. If that is the police, I shall require another beer. It was Kramer, naturally. He barged in with his overcoat still dripping from the storm, cigar clenched unlit between his teeth, and Stebbins hulking behind him like an obedient bulldog. The smell of rain, tobacco, and irritation entered with them. Evening, Wolfe, Kramer said without any pretense of manners. You've heard? I have, Wolfe said. The city, it seems, is determined to drown itself in cyanide. Kramer dropped his hat on the couch and planted himself by the desk. 2 men dead in the same circle, both connected to the same woman and the same club. Don't tell me you're not involved. I would not insult your intelligence by denying the obvious, Wolfe said, his tone dry as parchment. Mrs. Dane is my client. That hardly makes me an accessory. Stebbins grunted. Depends on what kind of accessory. Could be decorative, could be useful. I said, Careful, Pearlie. If you start sounding poetic, you'll lose your badge. Kramer ignored us both. Hale's death ties straight back to Dane. The lab boys found Dane's prints on the thermos. How they got there, I don't know, but I intend to. Wolfe steepled his fingers. You assume continuity of motive. Perhaps the 2 deaths share a cause deeper than convenience. Save the philosophy, Kramer barked. I've got the DA on my neck and reporters eating my shoes. Hale's wife says he didn't drink coffee after noon. You want to guess who poured it for him? Someone with access to his office, Wolfe murmured, and familiarity with his habits, which I gather narrows the field to everyone he worked with and half the Kennel Club membership. Kramer jabbed a finger. Cut the wordplay, Wolfe. Your boy here has been knee-deep in this since the first body. Maybe he saw something. Maybe someone talked too much. I leaned back, hands in pockets. Inspector, if talk killed Hale, the Kennel Club would be a cemetery. That's enough, Kramer snapped. Your man's been too close to these mutts, maybe too cozy. Before I could shoot back, Wolfe's voice dropped to that glacial tone that could freeze a blast furnace. "Inspector," he said, "my man has more integrity than your morgue capacity. If you intend to accuse him, do so directly, or kindly remove your wet bulk from my carpet." The silence that followed could have been bottled. Stebbins looked at Kramer looked at Wolfe, and I looked at the beer glass, wondering if it was too early for popcorn. Finally, Kramer exhaled smoke and temper. "All right, maybe I overstepped." "You did," Wolfe said curtly. "Archie's competence is beyond reproach. His wit less so, but that is my burden." I grinned. "You love me for it." "Pfui," Wolfe said, though there was the faintest glimmer behind his eyes. Kramer fished a photograph from his coat pocket and tossed it on the desk. "That's the thermos, LH, engraved on the cap. Hale's secretary swears it was on his desk when she left at 5. By 8 he's dead. Dane's print's on the handle. You tell me how." Wolfe studied the picture. "The prints were real?" "Real enough for the lab," Kramer said. "But the alignment's off, like someone lifted them from another surface." Wolfe nodded slowly. "A transfer, then. Artificial reproduction. Someone with both leisure and precision. You have no shortage of suspects fitting that description, Inspector." "Yeah, but I've got no proof," Kramer muttered. "You got a theory?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "but it's in gestation." Kramer made a sound halfway between a grunt and a curse. "Then keep it short. I don't have time for one of your philosophical pregnancies." "I shall endeavour to deliver twins," Wolfe replied. Stebbins snorted. Kramer didn't. He turned toward me. "Goodwin, where were you tonight?" "Right here, Inspector, nursing a coffee and my patients." "Anyone confirm that?" "Fritz," I said, though you'll have to take his word in Swiss. Kramer chewed his cigar without lighting it. "You think this ties to Dane's forged pedigrees?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that both men trafficked in deception. Dane in forged dogs, Hale in doctored records. Poison is a convenient method for silencing anyone who knows how to read between the bloodlines." Kramer's brows furrowed. "You're saying Hale was dirty?" "I am saying," Wolfe replied, "that purity is an obsession among breeders, and obsessions are profitable. Someone bred deceit, and now reaps the litter." I said, "Whoever did this was housebreaking in the 10 Commandments." Wolfe gave me a look that might have peeled wallpaper. "Archie, please, the Almighty requires no metaphors." Kramer wasn't listening. He was pacing, slow and heavy. "All right. If your theory holds water, we've got someone smart enough to frame one man with another's fingerprints and poison a doctor in a moving car. That's more organization than passion." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Which rules out Mrs. Dane, though she will be the first your superiors choose to arrest. They always prefer widows. They photograph well." Kramer scowled but didn't argue. "You know damn well the press already has her name in headlines." Wolfe's lips thinned. "The press is an infection. It spreads before diagnosis." I couldn't resist. "Lon Cohen sends his love." "Archie," Wolfe said warningly. "All right," I said. "He sends his questions then." Kramer gathered his hat. "Look, Wolfe, I've got the lab on call and the DA breathing fire. You find something, anything, I want it fast." "I am not your subordinate, Inspector," Wolfe said, "but I will, as ever, pursue truth for my own satisfaction." Kramer gave a grunt that passed for truce. "Fine, but if this breaks bad, I'll be back, with a warrant." Wolfe inclined his head. A predictable pattern. When they were gone, the silence returned like a well-trained dog. The rain outside had turned to thunder, rattling the windows. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. "Well," I said, "you handled that nicely. Kramer only threatened legal action once." "Phooey," Wolfe murmured. He needed to reassert his dominion, a harmless display. "Sure," I said, like a lion testing the cage bars. Wolfe ignored that and reached for the phone. "Fritz, coffee. Black." He hung up and turned to me. "We are entering dangerous terrain, Archie. The enemy is intelligent and disciplined." "That narrows it down to about 6 million New Yorkers," I said. He didn't rise to the bait. "The connection between the two deaths is not mere coincidence. Hale's fingerprints on forged certificates could have exposed Dane's enterprise, or his own complicity. Poison silences both potential talkers." I went to the typewriter. "You want me to take this down?" "Yes, dictation." He began slowly. voice like a metronome. The motive is preservation, financial or reputational. The method is poison, selected for certainty and symbolism. The medium, coffee, is habitual, trusted, daily. The signature of the killer is familiarity with both men's routines and with the science of transfer prints. I kept up, typing fast. You think the killer's from the Kennel Club? I think, Wolfe said, that this killer breeds deception as deliberately as one breeds dogs, selectively, methodically, for result. We hunt the breeder of deceit. That line landed heavy, and I knew it would end up on the case file's front page. The elevator buzzed softly, Fritz with the coffee. He appeared, silent as a priest, set the tray down and vanished again. Wolfe inhaled the aroma as if caffeine carried revelation. Outside, thunder rolled again and lightning carved the skyline. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. You know, boss, there's something comforting about murder during a storm. Keeps the city honest. He shot me a look. Archie, if you are suggesting meteorology influences morality, I'm suggesting the rain hides the smell, I said. He grunted, which was as close as he came to amusement. We worked in silence a few more minutes, me filing notes, him lost in thought. Finally he said, Archie, tomorrow morning we summon Mrs. Dane again. I require her complete account of her husband's partnerships and her enemies. You think she's still withholding? I think, he said, reaching for his beer, that everyone in this case is, even the dogs. I shut the notebook. In that case, we'd better learn to bark. He took a long sip, eyes closing in rare approval. Phooey, leave barking to canines, Archie. We, alas, must think. By 11 that night, the brownstone office looked like a war room for lost causes. The rain had slacked to drizzle, Manhattan was humming its tired lullaby outside, and Wolfe had turned his desk into an evidence altar. Papers, envelopes, the thermos, and front and centre, Henry Dane's battered briefcase. Their ghostly presence lingered in the smell of leather and the faint trace of wet fur clinging to the coat rack. Wolfe was scowling at the briefcase as if it had insulted him in Latin. Archie, open it, he said finally. I popped the clasp. Inside, the usual businessman's kit, ledgers, correspondence, a half-used pack of Chesterfields, and a faint smell of kennel disinfectant. If this guy kept secrets, I said, he filed them under D for dog. Proceed, Wolfe ordered, his fingers forming their cathedral steeple. Before I could start sifting, the phone rang. I got it on the first buzz. Kramer's growl cut through the line like a bulldog through steak. Goodwin, we've got your chauffeur friend in custody. Claims he was only following orders. Orders from whom? I asked. Mrs. Dane, Kramer said, says she told him to dispose of papers after her husband's death. No mention of murder, just clean up. But he's sweating like a cheap suit. I think he's been coached. Mind if I guess who by? Try me. Victoria Ames, I said. Kramer made a noise like a motor misfiring. You're not as dumb as you sound. Her name's come up twice tonight. You get anything solid, call me. He hung up before I could offer a bedtime story. I turned to Wolfe, who was still gazing at the briefcase as though he could smell the lie through the leather. The chauffeur's confessed to handling documents for Mrs. Dane, I said. Swears he didn't kill anybody, but he's been fed lines by someone with better diction. Miss Ames, Wolfe said softly. Of course. Of course, I echoed. Confession is diversion, he said. The simplest camouflage is truth, soiled just enough to distract. Examine the briefcase. I went to work, sorting through folders while he watched, silent as a hawk in tweed. Half the papers were kennel records, pedigree forms, vaccination slips, and breeding charts that would make a geneticist dizzy. Duchess and Duke were well documented, Domino less so. Then I noticed Duchess's name typed twice on one form. The second entry struck through with blue pencil. Something about it looked wrong. I lifted the page, and beneath it, the lining of the briefcase bulged slightly. I pried at the seam with a penknife, and out popped a small metal canister, no bigger than a film reel. I held it up. If this isn't the smoking gun, it's at least the film of it. Wolfe leaned forward. Microfilm. Somebody's modern, I said. You think he was hiding love letters? Phooey. Love letters do not require magnification. Open it carefully. I unscrewed the top, and the reel inside glimmered like a secret trying to breathe. Could be kennel data. Could be recipes. Could be dynamite. Wolfe nodded toward the desk lamp. Hold it to the light. The script was microscopic, lines of type too fine for the naked eye. But even from that glimpse I recognized the pattern, columns of numbers and names, familiar from the forged pedigree certificates. Altered breeding data, I said. Our late broker's side hustle in fake bloodlines. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. And you will note the smudge on the canister rim. I squinted. Fingerprint. Lift it. I fetched the duster and powder kit from the cabinet, standard issue in our little home lab of sin. A few brushes later, the print came up clear, distinct loops, small and feminine. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Have you memorized Miss Ames's police file? I've seen it, I said. That pattern matches Miss Ames's print on file. Handling, not proof of authorship. He exhaled slowly. So, she handled the film, perhaps prepared it. Or planted it, I said. Maybe she figured Dane would take the fall for her forgery racket. Unlikely, Wolfe said. She lacks subtlety. Her vanity would have required applause. I smirked. Maybe she planned to sell the applause rights after. Archie, he said sharply, you are flippant when near discovery. Control yourself. Sure, I said, but you'll admit this stinks like a kennel in August. He gave me one of his glacier looks. Metaphors again. Must I remind you that language, like breeding, deteriorates when abused? I'm housebroken, I said. Barely. He ignored that and turned the canister over in his hand. This, Mr. Goodwin, is our false scent, a deliberate trail meant to mislead. Miss Ames wants us to chase Mrs. Dane. Mrs. Dane, conveniently, is already under suspicion. The chauffeur's confession merely strengthens the illusion. Then what's real? The question is who benefits from both deaths and the forged pedigrees. Hale and Dane were opposite poles of the same enterprise. Remove them, and someone inherits a monopoly. I said, and that someone might have nice fingerprints. He grunted assent. Precisely. You will call Mr. Pantzer and instruct him to secure the Kennel Club Records office. Quietly. No police interference. I wish to know who has visited since Hale's death. I reached for the phone. Saul answered on the second ring, cool as always. I gave him Wolfe's orders and hung up. Wolfe had settled back in his chair, eyes half closed, the look of a man mentally arranging pawns on a board only he could see. Archie, he said finally, observe the irony. Deceit in pedigree breeding. Humanity's fascination with purity produces only mongrels of morality. That's philosophy before bedtime, I said. You planning to write it down? He almost smiled. Perhaps after orchids. Now note the time. It's 11:52. Good. Tomorrow, 9 precisely, we shall confront Mrs. Dane with this film. Why not call Kramer now? He'll have a fit when he learns we've been keeping evidence warm. Inspector Kramer, Wolfe said, is not constitutionally equipped to appreciate nuance. I prefer to spare him the seizure. I leaned against the desk. You know, boss, for a man who hates dogs, you sure run your cases like a bloodhound. That earned a rare flicker of approval. Archie, your tenacity is canine. Fortuitously, your hygiene is not. Thanks, I said. I'll add it to my resume under praise from employer. Pfui, go type your report before I rescind it. I sat at the typewriter, keys clacking through the quiet. Wolfe poured himself another beer, the glass fogging under the lamp glow. Outside, the rain thickened again, soft against the windows. When I finished the page, I slid it across to him. You think she'll crack tomorrow? She will attempt performance, Wolfe said, but vanity, like deceit, leaves odour, and I have an excellent nose. Not as good as Domino's, I said. Archie. Yes, sir. Go to bed before I revoke your existence. I grinned, stacked the files, and turned off the desk lamp. The microfilm gleamed faintly in its evidence bag, one perfect coil of truth waiting to trip someone's lie. As I headed upstairs, I thought about Wolfe's line, the breeder of deceit. Whoever that was, they'd bred a fine litter of trouble, and come morning we'd start sniffing them out. Earlier, with Mrs. Dane's signed release and Kramer's grunt, I'd borrowed Duchess for a quick neutral ground scent test, useful as it turned out. Kramer's patience was like a leash, strong, short, and getting shorter. I knew it the moment Fritz opened the door and the inspector's voice rolled in ahead of him, carrying enough gravel to resurface a driveway. "Tell Wolfe I've got no time for his games today." Fritz, ever the diplomat, inclined his head and vanished without comment. A moment later, the office door opened, and Kramer filled it, hat in hand, cigar already chewed to the shape of despair. Behind him trailed Pearlie Stebbins, whose expression suggested he'd just been promoted from bulldog to bloodhound. "Good afternoon, Inspector," Wolfe said from behind his desk, not rising. He never did. The sunlight from the west window threw stripes across his vest, making him look like a man half made of shadow. "I trust your warrant is properly worded and free from typographical error." Kramer slapped a folded document on the edge of the desk. "Don't tempt me, Wolfe. The DA wants results. You've been sitting on this case like a hen on a rock." Wolfe lifted his brows. "Charming. I assume you mean an incubation period. But yes, contemplation precedes hatching. Your department prefers to break shells prematurely." "Save the vocabulary," Kramer growled. "2 men dead, Dane and Hale. The press is running wild and the DA wants an arrest by morning. Mrs. Dane's name is already on his desk." That got me upright. "You're kidding." "I'm not," Kramer said. "She's the only one with clear motive, money, reputation, both men connected to her. The chauffeur's confession doesn't help her case either." Wolfe's eyes slid toward me. "Archie, remain silent. Your indignation, though admirable, is unproductive." "Fine," I said. "But if they hang the widow while we're still proofreading, it'll ruin my weekend." Wolfe ignored me, turning his attention back to Kramer. "Inspector, you have the intelligence to see that such an arrest would be farcical. You are being driven by political necessity, not evidence." Kramer's reply came sharp. "Don't talk to me about politics. Talk to me about proof. You've been poking around with your hired snoops and those dogs. If you've got something, say it. Otherwise, I'm walking out of here with that warrant." He planted both hands on the desk. Wolfe didn't flinch. If anything, he looked mildly inconvenienced, like someone being asked to share dessert. "You're remarkably theatrical today," Wolfe said. "Would you care for a beer before you issue threats?" Kramer's lips twitched. "I don't drink on duty." "Then your superiors have my condolences." I had to bite back a grin. Pearlie shifted, uncomfortable, probably because civility made him itchy. He handed Wolfe a brown envelope. "Autopsy report," he said. "On Hale, might interest you." Wolfe opened it, scanned the first page, and grunted. "Ah, the coffee contained traces of benzalkonium chloride, kennel disinfectant." Kramer nodded. "Same stuff they use in breeding kennels. You're the one knee-deep in that world. What's it mean?" "It means," Wolfe said, "that whoever poisoned Hale had access to the compound and knew how to disguise its bitterness with caffeine, and it links the second death directly to the kennel environment, not merely the social circle surrounding it." "Which still brings us back to Mrs. Dane," Kramer said. "She runs the kennel." "Her staff runs it," Wolfe corrected. "Mrs. Dane manages appearances. There's a difference." Kramer's jaw tightened. "You always talk like a man charging by the syllable." "That," Wolfe said, "is your misfortune, not mine." I decided to help, mostly because I like watching Kramer's ears change colour. "Inspector, if I may, there's a microfilm reel we found in Dane's briefcase. Altered pedigree data. It had Victoria Ames's fingerprint on it." Kramer's head snapped toward me. "Ames? The breeder who accused Dane?" "The same," I said. "We think she's been playing both sides, helping forge papers while pretending to expose them." Wolfe cleared his throat. "Correction, Archie. We know she handled the evidence. We merely lack the connecting motive." Kramer frowned, pacing a short, angry circuit around the rug. "If that's true, why not arrest her?" "Because," Wolfe said, "you have insufficient cause. And because, Inspector, you'd rather hang your hat on a widow than a society darling. Miss Ames would make a charming headline, but a terrible conviction." Kramer stopped pacing. "You think I enjoy this? The DA wants a scalp. I don't care whose, so long as it sticks." "An admirable creed," Wolfe said dryly. "But haste, as always, is the handmaiden of error." "Spare me the sermon," Kramer said. "Either give me something I can take upstairs or stay out of the way." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint clink as Fritz entered quietly, placing 2 chilled glasses on Wolfe's desk with the precision of a jeweller setting diamonds. The smell of malt filled the air. Fritz bowed and withdrew without a word. Wolfe lifted one glass, examined the colour like a man assessing sunset quality, and said, "Inspector, do sit. It will ease your digestion." Kramer hesitated, then sat, more a collapse than compliance. "All right," he muttered. "Talk." Wolfe sipped, eyes half-lidded. "You stand at a precipice, arrest the wrong party, and you not only jeopardize justice but hand the real killer his triumph. The disinfectant points to the kennels, the forged pedigrees reveal motive, profit disguised as prestige. But the mind behind this is disciplined, not impulsive." "Meaning?" Kramer asked. "Meaning Miss Ames," Wolfe said, "is cunning, not clever. This killer is both." Kramer exhaled smoke, his glare softer now, the heat traded for weariness. "You always make it sound like poetry. Trouble is, I can't sell poetry to the DA." "You could try truth," Wolfe suggested. "That's not in season," Kramer said. I almost applauded that one. Wolfe set his beer down with a finality that could have ended wars. "Inspector, I will make you an offer. You may have my notes." Kramer blinked. "Your notes?" "Unedited," Wolfe said, "including speculation, correspondence, and observational data. They will demonstrate progress, sufficient to pacify your superiors until I'm ready to deliver the murderer tied with a ribbon." Kramer eyed him warily. "You've never shared your notes with me before." "Then consider this an unprecedented act of magnanimity. I would prefer cooperation to intrusion." Kramer leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You're serious?" "I am rarely otherwise." He studied Wolfe for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "All right, Wolfe, I'll take your notes, but don't expect me to babysit your theory forever." "I ask only for 2 days," Wolfe said. "After that, I will either hand you the killer or retire in disgrace." Kramer grunted. "That'll be the day." Wolfe inclined his head. "Indeed." He reached for the bell cord and tugged. "Archie, retrieve the case file from the cabinet, top drawer, right side, and the transcript of Miss Ames's interview." I brought them over, thick folders neatly clipped. Wolfe slid them across the desk. Kramer took them, flipping through the pages like a man unsure whether he'd been handed gold or dynamite. "This enough to stall the DA?" I asked. "For now," Kramer said. "If he complains, I'll tell him Wolfe's hatching another egg." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Commendable." Kramer stood, gathering his hat and dignity. "All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. 2 days." "Agreed." He moved toward the door, paused, and looked back. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're probably right about Ames. But don't expect me to admit it twice." "Once is sufficient," Wolfe said. When they were gone, the silence in the room was almost luxurious. Wolfe reached for the second glass of beer, poured it expertly, and slid it toward me. "You, Archie," he said, "exercised restraint admirably. That for you is a rare and praiseworthy phenomenon." I grinned. "So I get beer instead of a medal?" "You get both," he said. "Drink it while it's cold." I raised the glass. "To patience," Wolfe nodded. "To law, when it remembers to think." The beer was perfect. Outside, a siren wailed down 35th Street, chasing something less patient than we were. By the time Saul Panzer showed up, it was a few minutes shy of midnight, and the brownstone had the quiet hum of a house that had run out of reasons to stay awake. Fritz was long gone to bed, the orchids were sleeping in their glass sanctum upstairs, and Wolfe had been communing with a legal pad for an hour straight, making tiny notations in his blocky hand that looked like the world's most suspicious grocery list. When the bell rang, Wolfe didn't so much as twitch. He just said, "Archie." I went to the door. If it had been Kramer again, I'd have invented a fire escape. But it was Saul, hat low, eyes sharper than any man should have at that hour. He slipped inside like a shadow on a mission and handed me a folder that looked thick enough to rewrite the 10 Commandments. "For Wolfe," he said, "from the Kennel Club offices. And Archie, if you ever tell anyone how I got it, I'll deny we've met." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. "But if this ends the case, I might buy you a dog biscuit." He gave a quick grin and disappeared into the night, silent as smoke. When I brought the folder in, Wolfe looked up from his desk as though Saul had just delivered the tablets from Sinai. "At last," he murmured. "The ledger." He gestured for me to sit. The desk lamp carved a neat circle of light in the middle of the dark room. The air smelled faintly of paper, beer, and trouble. I flipped the folder open. Inside were pages of neat handwritten accounts, dates, breeder names, stud fees, kennel expenses, and then a column labelled private arrangements. The numbers in that column were tidy and consistent, like a conscience on a retainer. Wolfe leaned forward. You see, of course, that these payments exceed any legitimate transaction. Sure, I said. Looks like Dane was collecting from people who'd cooked their pedigrees. That private arrangements section, blackmail income, he was milking them. Not milking, Wolfe corrected. Bleeding. I turned another page, and the first name in the column, Dr. Leonard Hale, paid out over 4 years. Yes, Wolfe said, our late chairman of the Kennel Club was both hypocrite and victim. Nice combination, I said. He falsified the bloodlines and then paid Dane to keep him respectable. Indeed, Wolfe's eyes gleamed. But more telling are the signatures. I looked closer. Each ledger page bore 2 sets of initials in the margin, HD for Henry Dane, and another, CD, inked in a finer hand. CD, I said. One of his partners? Not merely a partner, Wolfe said, a silent one. I turned a few more pages. Every entry after the first year bore those same initials. You think it's Clarice Dane? Wolfe exhaled, long and slow. Clarice Dane, widow, breeder, and beneficiary. The ledger records not her husband's deceit alone, but hers. She was the mind, he the instrument. I leaned back. So she'd been feeding her husband to the dogs, metaphorically first. Archie, Wolfe said, you are indelicate, but accurate. He reached for a fresh notepad and began sketching one of his infamous diagrams, concentric circles, names, arrows, and the occasional dotted line that looked like an afterthought but never was. I watched the process. It was like seeing a magician shuffle logic instead of cards. Observe, Wolfe said, pointing with his pen. At the centre, Mrs. Clarice Dane. Around her, 3 satellites. Her husband, Dr. Hale, and Miss Ames, each guilty of tampering with pedigree data, each capable of exposure. She maintained her advantage through silence and control. Until the husband started wanting a bigger cut, I said. Precisely. He threatened to reveal her authorship of the forged records unless she agreed to dissolve the arrangement. Instead, she arranged his dissolution. Poison, I guessed. Or manipulation, Wolfe said. The coffee was likely Hale's formula, but the disinfectant, benzalkonium chloride, was from her own kennels. She substituted his container, counting on the police to chase her husband's trail. Elegant, if reprehensible. I couldn't resist. When the fairer sex errs, it does so with orchestration. Wolfe shot me a dry look. I was about to say that, I grinned. Beat you to it. He grunted and returned to the pad. She then planted the microfilm to implicate Miss Ames, a clever double feint, enough to divide suspicion while she played the widow. Until now, I said, tapping the ledger. This proves she was in it up to her pearls. Pfui, Wolfe muttered. Pearls are mere decoration. Greed is the jewel that endures. The clock struck 12, muffled but insistent. I could tell he was weighing the next move. Call Saul, he said. Instruct him to guard the ledger until morning. Not a photocopy, the original, and have Mr. Kramer summoned at 10. At 10? You'll be in the plant rooms, he frowned. Then at 11. Right after orchids, naturally. He ignored the jab. We shall confront Mrs. Dane when the inspector arrives. By then, she will have read the morning papers and will be sufficiently unstrung to reveal herself. Good. I'll make sure the room's soundproof in case she decides to sing. Wolfe gave a brief sound that might have been amusement. Archie, your levity is both a defect and a salve. Tonight, it is tolerable. Gee, thanks. I began typing up the report. The keys clacked into the silence, punctuation for Wolfe's thoughts. He sipped his beer, made a note, sipped again. The ledger sat between us like a coiled snake. You realize, I said, this means Clarice Dane wasn't just covering up a scandal. She was running the racket. Indeed, he said. The charm of breeding circles lies in their obsession with purity. She exploited that vanity with perfect precision. Dane was merely the mouthpiece, she the mind. I whistled. You'd think a lady with that much cunning would pick a better husband. Marriage, Wolfe said, is rarely a contest of intellects. More often, it is a contract of illusions. I chuckled. If you ever start giving sermons, I'll start selling tickets. Phooey. The typewriter dinged its final line. I tore the page free and set it aside. That's the statement ready for Kramer. You sure you want to give him the full picture? Not yet, Wolfe said. Only enough to keep him from arresting the wrong woman prematurely. I will provide the conclusive evidence after Mrs. Dane supplies her own rope. I closed the ledger carefully. You think she'll talk? She will perform, Wolfe said. Women of her kind always do. Truth will be the unintended encore. I leaned back, stretching. The city outside had gone quiet. No taxis, no horns, just the hum of distant rain on pavement. The kind of hour when even lies start looking sleepy. Boss, I said, you ever wonder why people like her bother? All that scheming, all that elegance, just to end up knee-deep in kennel dirt. He glanced up, eyes half-lidded. Because, Archie, avarice does not soil itself, it soils others. She will believe herself immaculate until the very moment she is proven otherwise. Remind me never to play poker with you. You lack the patience, he said. Maybe, I said, but I like to win before sunrise. He folded his notepad, slid it into the drawer, and pulled the bell cord. A minute later, Fritz appeared in the doorway, robe immaculate as ever. Yes, sir? Chamomile tea, Wolfe said, and a glass of milk for Mr. Goodwin. I groaned. You've been rationing my milk intake like it's contraband. Your digestion, Wolfe said, benefits from restraint, and mine from silence. Fritz nodded and retreated. I shot Wolfe a mock salute. Someday I'll strike for better working conditions. He leaned back, closing his eyes. Until then, Archie, you may enjoy the privilege of witnessing reason restore order to chaos. That should suffice as compensation. I smirked. You do know how to sweet-talk a guy. Phooey. When Fritz returned with the tray, Wolfe took his cup with a nod, inhaled the steam and said, Tomorrow we shall excise the last pretense. Clarice Dane will stand revealed, not as widow nor breeder, but architect. A pity. She might have bred fine hounds had she not chosen to breed deceit. He sipped. I took my milk and raised it. Here's to greed, boss, the only pedigree that never goes out of style. He regarded me over the rim of his cup. You are incorrigible. Sure, I said, but house-trained. He sighed, set his cup down and reached for the lamp switch. The office plunged into shadow, except for the faint gleam of the ledger on the desk. Our ticket to truth, sitting there like a sleeping serpent waiting for morning. Dusk came crawling through the curtains like a tired cat, the kind that still had claws. The brownstone had that early evening quiet when Fritz's dinner prep hums faintly in the background and Wolfe is half a continent away inside his head. That's when the doorbell rang. Sharp, insistent, female. Mrs. Clarice Dane swept in before I'd finished announcing her, wrapped in mink and indignation. Her perfume could have startled orchids. I demand to know, she declared, why your assistant has been prying into my affairs like a common snoop. If innocence had a rehearsal, I murmured, she'd done 2 matinees and an evening show. Wolfe's head tilted toward me, one eyebrow conducting an orchestra of disapproval. Archie. Then to her, Madam, you will not address Mr. Goodwin as if he were one of your domesticated brutes. Be seated. She hesitated, then sank into the red leather chair, arranging her gloves with surgical precision. This intrusion, these insinuations, are intolerable. You have no proof, no authority. Wolfe raised a finger, and the room obeyed. Madam, you mistake irritation for defence. The ledger recovered from the Kennel Club shows your initials beside each extorted payment, and Dr. Hale's coffee bore traces of your kennel's disinfectant, the same compound found in your storage records. Her smile froze at the edges. Surely you don't suggest that I suggest nothing, Wolfe said. I state that coincidence repeated ceases to be coincidence. She stood, quick and bright-eyed. You have fabricated this, both of you. My husband's enemies were numerous, Wolfe said, yet few shared your opportunity and none your elegance. Sit. She did, but the elegance had a tremor now. As she adjusted her gloves, I noticed it, a faint blue-grey stain along the inner seam. Cyanide residue, unless the lady favoured poison as a fashion statement. Her gaze caught mine, sharp as a whip. You enjoy this, don't you, Mr. Goodwin? Not particularly, I said. I just like good theatre. Her voice dropped to a silken hiss. You'll regret this. Madam, Wolfe said quietly, threats are for the guilty. I advise you to conserve your strength. For a moment, no one moved. The clock ticked once, the air thick with her perfume and fury. Then Wolfe spoke again, calm as marble. We shall summon Inspector Kramer in the morning. Between now and then, pray compose a more plausible version of innocence. She drew herself up, regal but fraying. You will hear from my attorney. Doubtless, Wolfe said. He will find me here. When the door closed behind her, the silence swelled like a held breath. Wolfe looked at me, expression unreadable. Well? I asked. He sighed. A performance of skill, but not sincerity. Yeah, I said, and the curtain's coming down fast. If you've never staged a confession under studio lighting, take my word for it. It makes every lie glisten. The Gazette's photography room smelled of flash powder, fresh ink, and nerves. Victoria Ames sat stiff in her best mink, pretending the camera adored her, while Mrs. Dane hovered near a backdrop of velvet drapery, too elegant for a cornered criminal and too calm for an innocent. I'd arranged the meeting as a public relations piece about kennel philanthropy. Lon Cohen owed me a favour, and besides, the Gazette loved drama with pedigree. Duchess, the Labrador with better instincts than half the Homicide Bureau, sat at my heel looking like a fur-coated conscience. Ladies, I said, if you'll just relax, the photographer needs some natural expressions. Think of charity, ribbons, good breeding, that sort of thing. Mrs. Dane smiled, perfectly rehearsed. You do have a flair for the theatrical, Mr. Goodwin. That's me, I said. Broadway's loss, Wolfe's gain. I signalled the cameraman. The flash popped, and Duchess stiffened. Her nose twitched once, twice, and she gave a low growl that rumbled straight through the floorboards. Before anyone could blink, the dog lunged toward Mrs. Dane's handbag, teeth catching the strap like it had insulted her lineage. "Control that beast!" Mrs. Dane shrieked, yanking back. I reached her first. "Easy there," Duchess just got an exclusive. I pried open the purse, ignoring her protests, and there it was, a tiny glass ampule wedged inside the lining, clear, unmarked, except for a faint blue residue that made my stomach drop. Victoria gasped. What is that?" Mrs. Dane found her voice, brittle as ice. "A medicinal vial, my late husband—" "Save it," I said. "I've seen that same formula in Hale's coffee cup and in your kennel records. Cyanide, kennel grade. Your idea of pest control is a little extreme." Her hand trembled just enough to betray her. "You've planted it." "Sure," I said. "And the dog's part of the conspiracy too. She'll be testifying later." Duchess gave another low snarl, tail stiff. Verdict delivered. The photographer, bless his soul, clicked another flash. The bulb popped like punctuation. My pocket buzzed, the portable line we'd rigged to Wolfe's desk. I stepped aside and answered. His voice came smooth and calm, like he'd been expecting the call all along. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Got her, and the evidence. The Canine Division handled identification." "Commendable," Wolfe said. "Bring her, and the dog, home. We shall hold court at 8. I glanced back. Mrs. Dane had folded into her chair, face drained of colour, elegance peeling off like cheap varnish. Victoria Ames looked half triumphant, half terrified. Duchess just sat there panting, proud as a prosecutor. It was the first time, I told the photographer, a dog ever gave a press exclusive. He laughed weakly, but I didn't. The case was almost over, and from the look in Mrs. Dane's eyes, the show had just begun. The thunder outside was keeping time with the tension in the room. It was 9:45, dinner plates cleared, orchids closed upstairs, and Nero Wolfe had assembled what could only be called his personal menagerie. One inspector, one heiress, one suspect, and one dog that deserved a medal. Mrs. Clarice Dane sat rigidly in the red chair opposite Wolfe's desk, the picture of poise with all the warmth of a taxidermied swan. Victoria Ames was a few seats away, pretending indifference but radiating satisfaction. Kramer stood to one side, hat in hand and cigar unlit, waiting for Wolfe to pull the trigger, and behind me, Duchess the Labrador kept her eyes fixed on Mrs. Dane's gloves as if justice had a scent. Wolfe began without ceremony. "This, madam, is the conclusion of an unseemly business." His voice rolled slow and deep, each word spaced like fence posts. Your husband discovered that you had falsified breeding records, that you had, to speak plainly, sold counterfeit purity to men of reputation. When he threatened to expose you, you silenced him with cyanide. Kramer grunted. And Hale? Wolfe didn't look up. Dr. Hale learned of the same deceit. He attempted blackmail. She used the same method on him, with less restraint. Mrs. Dane's lips barely moved. Preposterous. Phooey. Wolfe's hand lifted, signaling silence. You were undone by loyalty. Not yours, but your dog's. Domino's leash was frayed where it had been looped around your husband's wrist. The fibres matched the rope burns on the corpse, I added, and Duchess here confirmed the rest. She's got a nose for guilt. Kramer struck his match and lit the cigar at last. You've got proof of that? Of course, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Panzer retrieved the leash this afternoon. CSU's rush report confirms the fibre match to Dane's wrist burns. Mrs. Dane rose abruptly. You dare! Wolfe's palm descended like a gavel. Sit. You have already squandered decorum. Do not forfeit dignity. She sank back. For the first time, her polish cracked, eyes wide, breath shallow. A woman discovering that control, once lost, never returns politely. Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. Inspector, the evidence will bear your scrutiny. The ledger, the fibres, the vial in her purse. You may proceed with formal charges. Kramer nodded, grim but respectful. You'll get credit for this one, Wolfe, whether you like it or not. I like accuracy, Wolfe said. Credit is irrelevant. As Stebbins escorted Mrs. Dane out, Duchess gave a quiet, satisfied growl, a canine amen to the whole proceeding. Wolfe exhaled heavily, reached for the bell cord and murmured, Fritz, beer. I leaned on the desk, watching the room empty. I'd seen Wolfe trap people before, I said, but this time he made obedience training look like opera. Wolfe's lips twitched. Archie, if my assistant's impertinence grates, Inspector, console yourself. It yields results. Kramer snorted. Yeah, I'll drink to that. And with thunder rolling overhead, Fritz brought the beer. The brownstone always had its own rhythm after a case closed, that deep, satisfied quiet that settles in once the city outside has gone back to being someone else's problem. The rain had stopped, leaving a damp wind that nudged the curtains and carried in the smell of wet pavement. I was on the red leather sofa with the Gazette in my lap, headlines shouting in bold like it had cracked the case itself, heiress exposed in kennel killings. Fritz appeared in the doorway with his usual grace, balancing 2 chilled glasses and Wolfe's personal peace treaty with civilization, a bottle of beer in each hand. He set them down, nodded once, and retreated without a word. The man could make an exit quieter than a priest at confession. Wolfe lifted his glass, studying the foam with priestly reverence. To the dogs of virtue, he said solemnly, whose instincts are superior to most human intellects. I raised mine. Here, especially Duchess. That mutt deserves her own headline. He frowned, the kind that could curdle milk. Archie, your penchant for irreverence continues to assault good taste. Sure, I said, leaning back. But you keep me around anyway. Admit it. I bring out your tender side. He gave me the look that usually preceded a pfui, but this time he only sighed. Tenderness is not my métier. You, however, are incorrigible. That's why you keep me, I said. He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, warm, comfortable, full of the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the faint rustle of newsprint in my hands. Then I saw it. The corner of his mouth curved, just enough to confirm my point without cheapening it with words. I flipped another page of the Gazette. They spelled your name right for once. You should frame it. Recluse detective exposes heiress in kennel scandal. Has a nice ring. Maybe we should start branding the brownstone. Wolfe investigations. Discreet, discreetly expensive. Archie, he said, his voice like velvet wrapped around steel. If I ever open a kennel, I shall train the orchids. They at least bloom without impertinence. I grinned. If Wolfe ever opens a kennel, I'm betting on the orchids to win best in show. That earned me one of his rarer indulgences, a short, genuine chuckle as brief and rich as his patience. He took another measured sip, eyes half-lidded. Loyalty, Archie, he murmured. a rare virtue in man or beast. Without it there is no civilization, only competition. Maybe, I said, but competition sure makes for better headlines. He ignored that, staring into the golden depths of his glass like he could see all of human folly swimming in there. Outside, the thunder had rolled away. The brownstone exhaled. I folded the Gazette, leaned back, and let the night settle in. Another case closed, another toast made, and just enough silence left for tomorrow's trouble to start brewing.